All right, let's spend a little bit of time today talking about a feature that I don't think a lot of you ever even bother to think about, and more importantly, what it unlocks inside your camera once you do. NTSC versus PAL. Let's go take a look. Our cameras are like great little friends. The more we get to know them, the more time we spend with them, the more hidden depths and knowledge we uncover about them, which makes the relationship that much more satisfying. And there's one feature on your camera that basically every camera you have does have on there that I think a lot of us that are shooters, especially in North America, do not realize makes a difference in what our camera can and can't do. And that is NTSC versus PAL. Now, I'll get into what that is in a second, but the big thing you need to understand about what NTSC versus PAL does, these two video systems establish different base frame rates for your camera. Now, I'm actually shooting with a Canon R5, which is a great camera. I absolutely love it, but it's actually surprisingly limited in the frame rate options that it gives you. So I'm in North America, which means when I'm shooting, I have options of 24, 30, 60, and I can get 120 frames a second on my R5 if I'm willing to dance with the overheating monster. Now, this actually really bums me out because as a longtime Panasonic user, my GH5 had a huge range of frame rates that I could choose from, basically on my entire range of my camera. And what I discovered was my personal favorite frame rate was actually 48 frames a second, and if I wanted to go for super slow motion, I actually like 96 frames per second. Now, there's a reason why I really love 48 frames per second versus 60 frames per second if I'm shooting human subjects. And this is completely subjective, but I just personally feel that when I'm shooting human subjects, that 48 frames per second gives me a nice dramatic quality, and the 60 frames per second, I'll be honest, it just comes across as a little too slow. It's just a little too draggy. Whereas I feel, in my opinion, 48 frames per second gives me a much more organic, dramatic slow motion feel than 60. And that's also true for me if I'm doing slow motion. I really feel that 120 frames a second, while it's great to have, I just feel like I'm doing human subjects and want to really dramatize it. The 96 for me personally just feels better than 120. Now, if I'm doing non-human subjects, that's when I really want to get the 60 frames per second and the 120 frames per second. And really what it comes down to is, as a shooter, I want to have it all. I want to have access to 60. I want to have access to 48 or 50. I want to have access to 100 or 120 or 96. And the Canon R5 really limits you in that ability, unless you're switching video systems. And the great thing about the Canon R5, if you haven't tried this, is you can absolutely shoot at 50 and 100 frames per second as long as you switch to PAL. And this is great because for me personally, this gets me very, very close to that 48 and 96 frames per second that I love. And it gives me the look and feel that I want in my slow motion video, which I greatly prefer to 60 versus 120. This is not going to be for everyone, but if you are someone who's been using 60s or 120 and want to mix it up or just have a slightly different feel, this is something that's very, very important to look at. And the great thing is, on your Canon R5, it is super easy to do it. You basically come in here into the second setup window, you go to video system, and then you can choose between PAL and NTSC. And I personally use this so much, I've actually personalized my menu video system in my settings tab so that I can quickly go to it and switch it out whenever I want to, because I find myself jumping between NTSC and PAL all the time. You hit the button, the camera will then reset up into the new video system, and you can pretty much be up to going pretty quickly. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are probably asking this question right now, which is, Brian, what is PAL versus NTSC anyway? And really, this goes back all the way to including color video in the days of interlaced TV. These are based on standards that were developed in the 1950s to deal with technology back then. And what happened is North America basically adopted the NTSC format. Europe, a lot of Asia, a lot of parts of the world adopted PAL. And so you can see here in this map that you have this sort of partition of the world. There's also another one called CCAM, but that doesn't really apply on our cameras today, so we're going to look at NTSC and PAL. Now, the big thing is we have come a long way since the 1950s, and today most TVs are progressive. As a matter of fact, this means the old needs of NTSC versus PAL are pretty redundant as far as video presentation. And if you shoot in NTSC or PAL, you can literally, in Premiere or most editing programs, you can export either as a PAL or NTSC on your export. So your capture is not that important because of the progressive quality now of television sets. And what this means is the format you record in is not as important. Almost every nonlinear today is very, very good at mixing these things together and editing it without any real problems. Now, what is important is to know if you're in North America versus Europe or a PAL country is the standard picture frequency. In North America, we are here at 60 hertz, and in PAL countries, it's 50 hertz. And this is based on that alternating fill technology that we were talking about, and that's why the 60 hertz, you have multiples of 30. That's why you have 30 frames, 60 frames in NTSC, and in PAL, you have 25 and 50 frames in PAL. So the question if you want to go between PAL and NTSC to access all those different frame rates is this: how does it affect you when you're shooting? What are the things you need to take into account if you're switching between these two different systems? And really, it comes down to this. If you're shooting outside in natural light, you will never have any problem. You can shoot 50 at 100 in PAL if that's what you want to do. You can shoot at 60, 30, or 120 in NTSC. You can switch between them. Natural light, using sunlight, using ambient light, you will never have a problem whatsoever. You can literally intermix these without any problem whatsoever. However, based on your location, if you want to shoot stuff with electrical lights, this is where you have to be aware of the difference. Because it's not just the picture frequency, it's actually the electrical current that can come in your region. Now, in North America, we have 60 hertz as our electrical frequency. In Europe and other PAL countries, they have 50 hertz. And what this means, if you're using non-movie lights, especially incandescents, you will see flicker on your lights. And this is because standard light bulbs actually turn on and off at about 50 frames per second. Now, that's too fast for the human eye to see, but the camera, if you're shooting at a frame rate like that, will see it. Now, the good news is this is really something you have to be aware around if you are shooting around incandescents. But newer LEDs, a lot of fluorescence will not give you a problem. And most modern movie lights are not going to give you an issue if you're shooting in PAL or in NTSC. So if you're in a situation where you can control the light, you have access to all these extra frame rates, and it's not going to be a problem for you. What you need to be aware of if you're in a situation where you can't control the light, make sure you can see. Now, the good news is with a camera like the Canon R5, you can look at the viewfinder and see that shutter through the viewfinder, so know if you have a problem. But be aware, if you have mixed light sources, you may get camera flicker. You need to be aware if you're in a situation where that could be a problem. The other thing, if you're shooting outside and street lamps are coming on, be aware of what the street lamps are doing, because the region you're on, that could introduce flicker. The good news is though, even if you do get flicker, if I'm shooting in PAL, for instance, you can see here, I can actually sometimes change my shutter angle to remove the flicker. Like if I take a picture right here at 50 frames per second of a computer screen, if I adjust my shutter angle, you can see that I can take away the flicker by my shutter angle. So sometimes that still allows you to use this 50 or 100 frames per second if you like that, and control the flicker through your shutter angle. So as you can see, NTSC versus PAL, it's something that I think a lot of us don't really give a second's thought to, but having all these extra frame rate options, I think really is so nice because it just unlocks what we can do creatively and access in our camera. And I personally am someone that really, really wants to access that 50 and 100 frame rate range because that's the type of energy and motion I prefer if I'm doing slow motion, honestly, over 60 or 120. And as long as I make sure I can control the lights and I'm aware of it, I can get that motion. It makes me a lot happier and it works really, really great for me. Anyway, guys, that's pretty much what I have to say about that. I hope I gained a PAL or two from this. And yeah, please leave me any comments. If you have any questions down below, I'd love to hear from you. Yeah, go out there, keep on shooting. And yeah, I'll talk to you soon.